Hey, City Life Church, happy Friday to you. Just wanted to come and give you a little devotion to help carry you through the weekend. It's based on Matthew 9. I'm going to read verses 14 to 17 out of the New Living Translation. It's often referred to as the parable of the wineskin, but he also makes some comments about a garment, and I think both of them together are important to make sure that we don't misunderstand exactly what Jesus is trying to say. So let me read it to you. Again, Matthew 9, 14 to 17. It says, "One day the disciples of John the Baptist came to Jesus and asked him, 'Why don't your disciples fast like we do and the Pharisees do?'" Now listen to what Jesus says in verse 15. It says, "Jesus replied, 'Do wedding guests mourn while celebrating with the groom? Of course not. But someday the groom will be taken away from them, and then they will fast. Besides, who would patch old clothing with new cloth? For the new patch would shrink and rip away from the old cloth, leaving an even bigger tear than before. If you do the right things at the wrong time, they can actually have an adverse effect on your life." Verse 17, "No one puts new wine." So here he shifts. He moves from the cloth illustration and he moves to the wineskin illustration. "No one puts new wine into an old wineskin, for the old wineskin would burst from the pressure, spilling the wine and ruining the skins." Right? As the wine ferments, the gases are emitted, and the wineskin needs to be able to stretch, and an old wineskin would burst under such pressure. It says new wine is stored in new wineskin so that both are preserved. So again, Jesus comes back to this idea of you've got to do the right things at the right time if they're going to be effectual, if they're going to be beneficial. I think what Jesus is trying to say here is that he wants us to understand that religious activity, because remember, he's giving us this teaching in response to a question about fasting, that religious activities, or what we would call spiritual disciplines, are ineffectual if you've not yet first dealt with the restoration of our relationship with God. Jesus is trying to help us to understand that the Mosaic law, that the old covenant, was not given to us because it was God's plan that should have worked and didn't. So now he's got to go to plan B. Paul, all throughout the book of Galatians in the New Testament, you can read that if you're not familiar with it, spends a lot of time helping us to understand that the reason why the Mosaic law was given to us was to reveal to us actually what would not work. The Mosaic law in the first covenant was given to us because God was trying to say to the world, century after century after century, that religious practice is completely ineffectual without first the restoration of relationship. It's why Jesus talks here about, listen to what he says. He says, "Do the wedding guests mourn while celebrating the groom? Of course not, but someday the groom will be taken away." That's referring to Jesus' death, where there is an opportunity for the restoration of relationship. Once Jesus, the groom, dies, once he goes away, once he gives his life, dies, and is raised from the dead, there is an opportunity for there to be forgiveness of sin and the restoration of relationship. And then he says, and then they will fast. So religious activity and spiritual discipline does not transform us, but it does mature us. And so Jesus is saying, don't try to do the activities that mature until you've first done the work of transformation and change. And what we know, especially is what we've already referred to, is that there is no transformation and there is no change, there is no restoration of our relationship with God unless there is a vow of devotion to Jesus. So I'm going to put in the description of the video, I'm going to give you 6 things that I think are part of what it means to have a restored relationship with God. I'm going to give you some Bible verses that illustrate those and teach those points, and then that's going to create an opportunity for you to do some further teaching if you'd like. I'm going to put a prayer in there. If you've never made a vow of devotion to Christ, I'm going to put a prayer in there that you can pray, that today can be the day of your new beginning. And then I'm also going to put in there a link to a website, letspractice.com, which you'll have an opportunity to do a free download. If this idea of religious activities or spiritual disciplines and how they mature us, if that idea is new for you, then you'll be able to download that and get started. And so if you've got questions, you can always reach us through our website, citylifeva.com. I'll put that on there. info@citylifeva.com is an email that you can send. A link to our live stream for every service on Saturday at 5 o'clock is going to be in there. You can interact with us through the chat. You can also ask for prayer during that service with somebody on our one of our hosts, one of our pastors. And there's an opportunity there too. If you've never made a vow of devotion to Christ, you can do that in that service. So happy Friday to you again. I hope this devotion, I hope this lesson was meaningful to you, and I hope that I see you online on Saturday. We'll see you then.